everyone, my name's Jillian and I'll be your instructor for the 4-week animal watercolor course, and I'm very excited about it because that is something that is near and dear to my heart. So before I get started on this demonstration, I just wanted to tell you a little about myself. So I graduated from Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts about 2.5 years ago. My major was drawing and I primarily watercolored. So I had a 2-year position as a visiting artist at the Academy of Natural Sciences in the entomology department, and that was really fun. I made paintings for publications for them, for research projects, for some shows, and oftentimes just for fun because there's a lot of really cool insects there. And along the way, I've always been interested in natural history, but having a chance to work at the Natural History Museum really kind of hit home to me, not only how wonderful it is, but how important animal watercolor is to bringing new information, standardized information for species. It's just really important, and along the way I really grew a love for watercolor. I grew a love for animal watercolor, how it can be both scientifically significant, but also it could just be beautiful. I think that's also wonderful that you can just make something beautiful. What I think people run into with watercolor is they're kind of afraid of it because it's a lot of water. It can be seemingly hard to control, and that's just simply not the case. So really with watercolor, it just takes some patience and a willingness to learn techniques that sort of give you that control back or help you work with the sometimes unpredictable aspects of watercolor. But I have achieved some very rich and vibrant paintings that I don't think I could have gotten any other way because it is a water-based paint. So layering and stippling and scumbling, all of these things are possible with watercolor while still remaining transparency, and I think it's just really wonderful. So a lot of times in my work, it's like layers upon layers upon layers, and really it just takes patience and a little bit of courage. But once you get the hang of it, it's a lot of fun and really satisfying. So today, what I'm going to demonstrate for you is how to paint something that I love, a brook trout. It is native to the eastern United States. You'll find them a lot in the Appalachians. They're a beautiful fish. And as you can see on this painting, there's a lot of layers going on here. So how I start my paintings is with a drawing, and that's what we're going to start with today. If you'll bear with me for 1 second. I'm just going to move my camera so you can see my paper. So I've got my drawing set up, and I have kind of the skeleton of the drawing ready for you, just to make it easier to start with. So what I start with is just a very light, simple outline of the animal we're going to be drawing. Today's a brook trout. So as you can see, I've just got very bare, simple outlines going. And as we go along, I'm going to fix the shape of this fish so it's more accurate to the real thing. Try not to draw too dark because you don't want to worry about having to get rid of those lines once you begin to paint. And it's important that as you're drawing, once you get like a solid shape that you're happy with, that you try and create some volume. So this is a pretty important step for me. I'm going to do these volumetric circles. I'm going to travel along the line of the animal. Today it's a fish. And in the front, as if the circle was a band around the animal, in the front it's going to be a little darker. And as you move around the animal, it's going to be paler in the background. And if you can see that, what that's doing is giving this animal, this fish, some volume. And so we'll do about 3 or 4 bands around the body of the fish, just to make sure I've got it the way I like it. So it's got believable form and volume. This is pretty important. This helped me a lot especially when I was first starting out, because it can be really easy to make things look flat and kind of lifeless. So just go along like some major points and make these circles. And then what I do after that is I'll go into a little bit of detail so I have an idea of where the paint's going to lay, what's going to happen. So I'm going to fix up some of these shapes. So this fin's a little too pointed. I want to bring it back, make it a little more broad. So yeah, I'm going to take you through a little bit of these steps. Then I'm going to take a brief pause, paint a little, and come back so you can see. Okay, so we are back. We've got our basic drawing, and as you can see, I went in and I added some more detail just in the fins, so I have a little bit of structure to work with when I start adding color. So what's really important when you start adding color is that you have like a fairly large vessel of clean water. I've got an old honey jar. I prefer glass just because you can see what your water's at, but for a long time I used like an old Folgers coffee thing. It doesn't really matter as long as your water's clean. I've got my palette ready to go. Beautiful. This is my favorite thing because it's big, round, a lot of mixing space. And another really important component is a color testing sheet, so you can make sure the colors that you are about to put on your painting are really what you want. So I'm going to do my best to show you everything that I can in the short amount of time that we have. So I've got my brushes right here. I generally stick with smaller ones. The largest brush I'm going to use right now is a Filbert 8. It's the Princeton Velvet Touch. This is like a pretty durable, hardy line. I don't get much bigger than this when I'm painting something of this nature. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start applying some paint. Let me just get the right color. Okay. And we're good. Let's go. So I'm going to start with a pretty basic application of this dark greenish color that makes up a large part of the brook trout's body. And I'm going to test the color that I'm mixing on my sheet. That's pretty close to what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and apply it. And we're just going to do a small part of the brook trout since we've got limited time. So I'm using pretty thin, watery paint. I'm going to go ahead and make that actually even a little bit less potent. That way it's easier to layer and change as I need to. We're just going to focus on this little section of the brook trout right now. Yeah, so as you can see, that's one layer right there. Very light, easy to change. It's not really wet. It's wet enough that I can move it around, but it's not dripping anywhere. You can see that I can still move it. It's spreading the way I want, but there's no running. That's gonna make it hard for you to get the colors you want and the layers you want because your paint's just gonna go everywhere. So I kind of stick with a pretty controlled amount of water. I don't like drippage. It limits what you can do. All right, so that's the first one, and on the top of this trout, it's actually a little darker. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix up a darker greenish brown color. And we're gonna apply that to the top of this fish. And see, that's even a little too potent. So we're gonna do the same thing. And as you can see, these pencil lines that I made previously are really helpful markers for where the paint should start and stop. There is no guesswork happening here because we already did the work. So we know exactly where everything's going to be. I like to take the guesswork out of it in these early stages because that just makes it a lot harder to create a successful painting if you're spending all your time worrying about it. All right, and it's even a little darker up here. So I'm adding another thin layer. Still wet enough to spread if I need it to, but not so wet that you've got running water anywhere. And the paper I'm using right now is a 300-pound hot press Arches paper. Fabriano's good too. I just happen to prefer Arches. it's super absorbent. It can handle a lot of paint. The Fabriano is a little more absorbent and gives you like a velvety texture. I like to do a lot of scumbling though, and I find this Arches paper is better for that. So that's Arches 300-pound hot press. All right, so we've got a basic gradient going on. The belly of the fish is like this reddish orangey yellow color. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna make a pretty dark reddish orange color. I'm gonna use a lot of cadmium red in that, just to give it the hue. And again, that's a little more potent than I'd like it to be, so I'm gonna go ahead and stick some water in that. You can see there is no guesswork. We know exactly where our paint is stopping and starting, which is pretty cool. And I think that's where a lot of people get afraid with watercolor, is there's not a lot of prep work. And the page is so wet, you can't really control what your paint does. And that's not a bad thing. That can create some really beautiful paintings. But for this kind of watercolor, we're not looking for that. So yeah, and then the bottom line of the belly is almost black. It's like this very dark green that's almost black. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that in. All right. So that, my friends, is your first layer. All right. And we're back. So I did a little more work on the body of the fish, just adding more layers, still pretty pale, pretty light, and with our remaining time, I just want to show you how I start off with the beginning of the finishing details. So it is not going to be a totally finished product, but it is the beginning of the finishing details. So my paint, I'm going to show you here, it's a lot thicker than this. So you see how that's got a lot of transparency? This is pretty opaque. There's really not a lot of water in my mixture at all. It's mostly paint, just enough water to get it liquid and not clay-like. So once I move into the finer finishing details, I use much thicker paint. So what we're gonna do is do some of these spots that make this fish so beautiful. And it's pretty straightforward. You just have to have a lot of control. I'm using a Filbert 0. You can go even tinier. Sometimes I use something as small as like a spotter. It's like a 20-0. It's really, really stinking tiny. So yeah, as you can see, the transparency is a great base for this thicker paint. Do you see how vibrant that's sticking out? That's the lack of water. And I do my very best not to lighten my colors with white if I can help it. So this is like an orangey Indian yellow kind of thing going on. So I used Naples yellow to lighten it so it wasn't so dark instead of white, because white can make it chalky. Now don't get me wrong, I do use white to lighten my colors. It's just you have to use it. You have to be really cognizant of the way you're using it so your colors don't get chalky. So yeah, this is pretty much how I go about my finer details. And it doesn't have to be totally true to the fish or animal that you're working from. These little details, they should match it in terms of, like, it should be believable, but there's a lot of little spots on this fish, so I don't feel the need to make it totally true to this particular fish. It should be true to the species, but not, it doesn't have to be true to that particular fish. So this color, I need something a little colder, so I'm going to grab some lemon yellow from my palette. You can't really see it over there, but I'm grabbing some lemon yellow and I'm mixing it in with my paint. As you can see, it's still pretty thick, right? Not really opaque. And we're going to go, and just to add some depth, we're going to add some other colored spots in here so it's truer to the animal. Excuse me. All right. And we're going to go back to that warm color as we move down into this green, because this dark green has warmer colors on top of it. And yes, once these spots dry, I find I have to do second or third coats to keep that color vibrant, because it has a tendency to sink into the paper, which is why I love this paper, because it eats a lot of, it can take so much paint. And it's nice because you can layer to get a little bit of texture and a little bit of vibrancy. Well, a lot of vibrancy. So I think this is all I can show you right now, but that's actually a pretty good basic outline for how I structure my paintings, and just a few of the things we're going to be learning in class. There's a lot more that I can't wait to go more in depth with you about, but I am really, really excited about this class. So I'm just going to say bye, and I can't wait to see you and teach and learn together. All right. Bye. Yeah, I'll talk to you guys soon. I hope you enjoyed it. So that's a pretty basic overview of what one of my watercolor illustration looks like, what the method looks like. We're going to go into a lot more detail with those techniques and many more techniques besides the ones I just showed you. And we're going to talk about the history of watercolor, the history of natural history illustration. It's going to be a pretty interesting course, and I'm really excited to get started. So thanks, and I'll see you guys soon.